Really interesting. I mean, sadly the pandemic has had an impact on a lot of young people's lives, but those skills and experiences of, that novels are absolute constant.
For over 40 years, Prince Edward kept a devastating secret buried deep inside. While the world saw a dutiful royal, behind closed doors he was silently crumbling. Then, without warning, at a small charity event, he did the unthinkable. He threw away his script and exposed the shocking truth about what really happens behind palace walls. What he said next about his own family left the entire room speechless.
It's been a bit of a shock. However much one tries to prepare oneself for something like this, it's still a dreadful shock, and we're still trying to come to terms with that. And it's very, very sad.
The event itself was modest by royal standards. There were no television cameras, no massive press presence, just a small gathering focused on charitable work. Attendees expected the usual polite speech, a few handshakes, and perhaps some photos. Instead, they witnessed something far more significant. According to multiple reports from those present, Edward paused during his prepared remarks and then began speaking in a way that felt entirely unrehearsed. His voice carried emotion that many described as both surprising and deeply moving. Several people who attended the event later shared their impressions with various news outlets. One woman described the atmosphere as electric, noting that you could feel something shifting in the room the moment Edward began speaking more personally. Another attendee mentioned that it felt like watching someone finally release a weight they had been carrying for an incredibly long time. The usual formality that surrounds royal appearances seemed to dissolve, replaced by something much more genuine and unguarded. What Edward revealed that evening centered on his position within the royal family structure. As the youngest of 4 siblings, he has spent his entire life in what many have called the shadow of the monarchy's more prominent figures. His older brother Charles, now King Charles III, was always the heir to the throne. Prince Andrew, despite his controversies, commanded significant attention for decades. Princess Anne carved out her own distinct role as a hard-working senior royal. And then there was Edward, often described in media coverage as dependable but rarely featured in major royal stories. During his remarks in Surrey, Edward addressed this dynamic directly. Reports indicate he spoke about being instructed from a young age to support rather than stand out, to fulfill his duties without seeking recognition. He described decades of public service where his role seemed to be appearing at events, cutting ribbons, and offering support while remaining largely invisible in the broader narrative of the royal family. According to accounts from the evening, he used the phrase "the invisible royal" to describe how he had felt throughout much of his life. This sense of being overlooked apparently intensified as younger royals, particularly Prince William and later Prince Harry, became the focus of public and media attention. Edward continued his work, maintaining a schedule that included dozens of engagements each year, but the spotlight rarely fell on him. News coverage typically centered on other family members, and when Edward was mentioned, it was often in passing or as part of a larger group. The emotional weight of this position became clearer as Edward continued speaking that evening. Those present reported that his voice wavered at certain moments, suggesting genuine emotion rather than rehearsed sentiment. He spoke about looking at himself and questioning whether he truly belonged in the role he occupied. These were not the polished, carefully constructed statements that typically characterize royal public speaking. Instead, they reflected personal doubt and struggle that the public had never heard a senior royal express so directly. The response in the room was reportedly one of stunned silence. People accustomed to the usual royal protocol found themselves witnessing something quite different. According to various accounts, some attendees were visibly moved, while others seemed uncertain how to process what they were hearing. The typical boundaries between the royal family and the public felt momentarily removed, replaced by a rare moment of authentic human expression. Edward's willingness to speak this way represents a significant departure from traditional royal behaviour. The British monarchy has historically operated on principles of discretion and emotional restraint. Public displays of vulnerability have been rare, and senior royals typically avoid discussing their personal feelings about their positions within the family. Queen Elizabeth II famously maintained a carefully controlled public image throughout her 70-year reign, and this approach had largely been adopted by other family members as well. What makes Edward's remarks particularly notable is their contrast with this established pattern. He did not simply hint at difficulties or speak in vague terms about challenges. Instead, he offered specific observations about feeling marginalized and questioned. He acknowledged the existence of hierarchy within the family and suggested that his place in that hierarchy had come at a personal cost. These are not topics the royal family typically addresses publicly, making Edward's decision to do so all the more striking. The timing of these revelations also carries significance. Edward received the title Duke of Edinburgh in 2023, following his father's death and in accordance with Prince Philip's wishes. This was meant to honour both Edward and his father's legacy. However, rather than simply accepting this as a moment of recognition and pride, Edward's recent comments suggest the title brought complicated emotions. The responsibility of carrying forward his father's name and work apparently added pressure rather than solely providing honour. Reports from the Surrey event indicate Edward spoke about this dynamic as well. He mentioned feeling the weight of expectation that came with the Duke of Edinburgh title and the sense that he needed to live up to his father's reputation. Prince Philip was known for his no-nonsense approach, his dedication to duty, and his reluctance to show emotion publicly. Edward, by contrast, appears to be someone with a different temperament, and bridging that gap apparently created internal conflict. As Edward spoke that evening, he also touched on the nature of royal service itself. For those outside the royal family, the life of a prince or princess might seem privileged and straightforward. But Edward's comments suggested a more complex reality, one where duty and personal identity sometimes exist in tension. He described years of fulfilling responsibilities while wrestling with questions about his purpose and value within the family structure. The fact that Edward chose to share these thoughts at a relatively small charity event rather than through a formal interview or official statement adds another layer of interest. There was no media strategy apparent, no palace communications team managing the message. Instead, this appears to have been a spontaneous decision by Edward to speak truthfully about his experience. Whether this was planned or truly spur of the moment remains unclear, but the impact was immediate and significant. Those who have followed the royal family closely noted that Edward had always seemed content with his quieter role. He married Sophie Rhys-Jones in 1999, and the couple settled into what appeared to be a relatively normal life by royal standards. They raised their children, Lady Louise Windsor and James, Earl of Wessex, with notably less publicity than other young royals received. Edward's work focused largely on the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme and various arts and youth initiatives. From the outside, it seemed like a stable, if understated, royal life. But Edward's recent revelations suggest that outward appearance did not reflect internal reality. The composure and dedication visible to the public apparently masked deeper feelings of being undervalued and overlooked. For more than 4 decades, he maintained this facade, fulfilling his duties while privately grappling with his place in the family. The decision to finally speak openly about these experiences marks a significant shift, both for Edward personally and potentially for how the royal family operates going forward. The revelations that emerged from Prince Edward's unexpected speech in Surrey went far deeper than simply feeling overlooked within the royal family structure. As he continued speaking that evening, he began to address something far more personal and painful. The emotional weight he described was not just about public recognition or media attention. It was about fundamental questions of identity, worth, and belonging that had apparently haunted him throughout his adult life. According to those who were present, Edward spoke about the experience of growing up alongside siblings who each had clearly defined roles within the monarchy. Charles was always the heir, groomed from birth to eventually become king. Anne established herself as a tireless working royal with a distinct public persona. Andrew, despite later controversies, occupied a prominent position as a senior royal and served in the military with considerable public attention. Edward, meanwhile, found himself without such clear definition. He was not the heir, not the spare in the traditional sense once his nephews were born, and not someone who naturally attracted the kind of attention his siblings received. This lack of clear identity within the family structure apparently created a deep sense of uncertainty. Reports from the Surrey event indicate that Edward described looking in the mirror and struggling to see himself as a prince in any meaningful way. Instead, he saw someone who simply existed on the periphery of the royal story, present, but not particularly important. These are remarkably vulnerable admissions from someone who has spent decades maintaining a public image of contentment and dedication. The emotional toll of this position became even clearer as Edward discussed specific experiences. He reportedly spoke about attending major royal events and watching from the sidelines as other family members took center stage. Whether it was coronations, jubilees, weddings, or state occasions, Edward was there, fulfilling his role but rarely in focus. He described the experience of clapping and smiling while internally questioning whether his presence actually mattered to anyone. These observations paint a picture of someone who spent years performing a role while feeling disconnected from it. The outward appearance of a dutiful royal masked an inner experience of doubt and isolation. Edward apparently questioned whether he was merely a placeholder, someone who filled space in photographs and added numbers to attendance lists without contributing anything truly significant. For someone who has dedicated his life to public service, these doubts must have been particularly difficult to carry. The situation appears to have intensified after Prince Philip's death in April 2021. Edward's father had been a towering figure within the royal family, known for his strength, discipline, and unwavering commitment to duty. Philip rarely showed emotion publicly and maintained a stern demeanour throughout his decades of royal service. When Edward inherited the Duke of Edinburgh title in 2023, it was intended as an honour, a recognition of both Edward's work and his father's wishes. However, the reality of taking on this legacy proved more complicated than simple pride. According to accounts from the Surrey speech, Edward described the Duke of Edinburgh title as something that haunted rather than honoured him. He spoke about feeling as though he was walking in a shadow, trying to live up to a legacy that felt impossible to match. His father's reputation for toughness and formality created an expectation that Edward apparently struggled to meet. Where Philip was stern, Edward was gentler. Where Philip showed little emotion, Edward felt things deeply. This fundamental difference in temperament created a gap that Edward found difficult to bridge. Edward reportedly admitted that during his younger years, any display of emotion was met with instructions to toughen up. Affection within the family was sparse, and vulnerability was not encouraged. While he was careful to note that he did not blame his father for this, the impact was nonetheless significant. Edward spoke about feeling as though he was never quite enough, never quite what was expected or needed. No matter how hard he worked or how many engagements he attended, he could not shake the feeling that he fell short of the standard his father had set. This sense of inadequacy was not helped by the nature of Edward's public service. While he has led over 70 public engagements per year for many years, supporting youth programs, arts charities, and the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, this work rarely generated headlines. In an age where royal relevance is often measured by media coverage and public interest, Edward's steady but quiet contributions seemed to go largely unnoticed. He was doing the work, fulfilling his responsibilities, but without the recognition that might have validated his efforts. Those present at the Surrey event reported that Edward used particularly striking language to describe this dynamic. He spoke about his loyalty being interpreted as silence, his dedication viewed as weakness. Where he saw himself as providing steady, reliable support, others apparently saw someone who simply did not make waves. The strength it took to continue serving without recognition or validation was apparently not recognized as strength at all, but rather dismissed as passivity or lack of ambition. The most painful aspect of Edward's confession appeared to be his realization that he was never the story. Throughout decades of royal life, the narrative always focused elsewhere. When Charles's marriages and eventual accession dominated coverage, when Andrew's various scandals filled newspapers, when William and Harry became the faces of a new generation, Edward remained in the background. He was part of the official photographs listed in the attendance records, but never the focus of attention or interest. Edward reportedly acknowledged that he never complained publicly about this situation. He maintained his composure, continued his work, and projected an image of someone content with his role. But privately, he battled constant feelings that his work did not matter and his presence was not essential. He described himself as part of the picture, but never in focus, a supporting character in a story where others held all the meaningful roles. The emotional breaking point, according to Edward's account, came in the aftermath of Prince Philip's funeral. Behind closed doors, a family meeting took place that apparently spiraled into something far more difficult than expected. Discussions about logistics or arrangements. While Edward was careful not to name specific individuals, he strongly implied that Prince Andrew was involved in this gathering. The topics under discussion included inheritance, titles, and legacy, all sensitive subjects within any family, but particularly fraught within the royal context. What made this meeting so devastating for Edward was not just the subject matter, but the way he was treated during the discussion. He reportedly described being told that he did not have a say in important decisions, not because his input was wrong or unhelpful, but simply because of who he was within the family hierarchy. His position as the youngest sibling, as someone who had always been expected to support rather than lead, apparently meant his voice carried little weight, even in matters that directly affected him. Following this meeting, Edward found himself alone in a drawing room at Windsor Castle. There were no guards, no aides, no cameras, just portraits of previous royals hanging on the walls. At that moment, surrounded by images of family members who had always seemed more important or more central to the monarchy's story, Edward apparently broke down. He described crying not as a prince or as a duke, but simply as a son whom nobody seemed to remember or value. This moment of complete emotional collapse appears to have been a turning point. Edward reportedly revealed that even Sophie, his wife of over 20 years, had not fully understood the weight of what he had been carrying. He had smiled through everything, maintained his public duties, and projected stability while internally crumbling under the pressure and pain of feeling perpetually overlooked and undervalued. The realization that struck Edward most forcefully was that even during a time of family grief, following the death of his father, political considerations and hierarchy seemed to take precedence over emotional needs or family connection. There was no space for his voice, no acknowledgement of his feelings, no recognition that he too was mourning and struggling. He described feeling like a guest in his own bloodline, someone present but not truly belonging, tolerated but not valued. This profound sense of disconnection led Edward to seriously consider walking away from royal life entirely. He contemplated leaving behind the duties, the appearances, the palace obligations, all of it. According to his account, he stood at a window one night and wondered whether anyone would even notice if he simply disappeared. It was a moment of complete despair, the culmination of decades of feeling invisible and unnecessary within his own family. Just when it seemed Edward had reached his breaking point and might indeed walk away from royal life entirely, something unexpected occurred that pulled him back from that edge. In his Surrey speech, Edward revealed a deeply private moment that took place just weeks before Queen Elizabeth II passed away in September 2022. This conversation, which no one outside the immediate family had known about until Edward chose to share it, became a lifeline during his darkest period. Edward described the setting with careful detail, suggesting how meaningful the memory had become to him. It was a quiet afternoon at Windsor with no staff present and no official business to conduct. Just a mother and her son sitting together near a window that looked out over the grounds where Edward had played as a child. The informality of the moment stood in stark contrast to the usual structure of royal life, where even family interactions often carry a degree of formality and protocol. According to Edward's account, the conversation was gentle and unhurried. Queen Elizabeth, in her characteristically calm manner, observed that Edward had always possessed a quieter form of strength. She told him that she had recognized this quality in him even when others failed to see it. These words, simple as they were, apparently carried enormous weight for Edward. He admitted that he did not respond immediately when his mother said this. Instead, he looked away, not wanting her to see the tears forming in his eyes. For Edward, this represented the first time he had felt completely seen and understood within the royal family. Not as the spare son, not as someone standing in the shadows, but as himself with his own particular qualities and contributions. The validation coming from the Queen herself, someone who had dedicated her entire life to duty and understood the burdens of royal service better than anyone, made it especially meaningful. Edward described those words as an anchor, something he would return to repeatedly in the months following her death. The Queen's acknowledgement apparently gave Edward a reason to continue when he had been contemplating departure. Whenever he felt sidelined or overlooked in the period after her passing, he would recall that conversation by the window. The knowledge that she had recognized his value, even if others did not, provided him with strength to keep going. Edward emphasized that his mother had not spoken these words for public consumption or to fulfill any official purpose. She said them privately, intimately, meant only for him. That personal quality made them all the more precious. The decision to share this memory publicly represented a significant choice on Edward's part. Royals typically guard private family moments carefully, maintaining boundaries between their public roles and personal relationships. For Edward to reveal something so intimate and emotionally charged was nearly unprecedented. Those present at the Surrey event reportedly found this portion of his speech particularly moving, with several people visibly emotional as he spoke. The rawness and honesty of the moment created a connection between Edward and his audience that transcended the usual distance between royals and the public. However, the comfort Edward found, in his mother's words, could not fully protect him from what followed her death. He acknowledged that the Queen's passing in September 2022 changed everything within the family dynamic. His quiet connection to the crown, already fragile, seemed to disappear entirely. Without his mother's presence, Edward described the family atmosphere as becoming noticeably colder. The person who had seen and valued him was gone, and the shift in family relationships that followed proved difficult to navigate. The transition to King Charles III's reign brought changes throughout the royal household, but for Edward, these changes apparently felt particularly isolating. He revealed that his relationship with his eldest brother, now the monarch, became increasingly strained in the months following their mother's death. Meetings that Edward had previously attended were suddenly held without him. Messages he sent reportedly went unanswered for extended periods. The access and inclusion he had experienced, limited though it may have been, seemed to diminish further. Edward was careful to note that he had not expected promotion or elevation within the royal hierarchy when Charles became king. He understood the structure and his place within it. However, he had also not anticipated being actively pushed aside or excluded from family matters. The distance that grew between him and Charles appeared to be both professional and personal, affecting not just Edward's role in official royal business, but also the basic family relationship between brothers. Particularly painful for Edward was being excluded from decisions involving their late father's legacy. As someone who had worked closely with the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme and other initiatives associated with Prince Philip, Edward might have expected to be consulted on matters relating to his father's memory and ongoing projects. Instead, he found himself learning about major family announcements and decisions from news reports, rather than through direct family communication. The fact that he had to discover significant developments the same way the general public did highlighted just how far outside the inner circle he had fallen. The geographical proximity between Edward and Charles made the emotional distance even more striking. Living just miles apart, the two brothers apparently went weeks at times without any direct communication. Edward described maintaining his loyalty throughout this period, continuing his public duties and supporting the monarchy, even as he felt increasingly like an outsider within his own family. There was no anger in how he spoke about this situation, those present reported, but the hurt was unmistakable. Edward also touched on the changing dynamics around King Charles, noting that Queen Camilla had become the king's closest advisor. He was careful to say he held no personal grudge about this arrangement, understanding that monarchs need trusted confidants. However, Camilla's prominent role in Charles's decision-making apparently contributed to Edward's sense of being further removed from family matters. The inner circle had contracted, and Edward found himself firmly outside it. The most devastating line Edward spoke during this portion of his confession was his admission that he had not just lost his mother when Queen Elizabeth died. He had also lost his place within the family. This dual loss of both a parent and a sense of belonging apparently left him feeling more adrift than ever. The person who had seen his value was gone, and without her, Edward struggled to find where or whether he fit within the new order of the royal family. For decades, Edward had been known as the dependable one, the steady presence who could be counted on to fulfill his duties without complaint or drama. He had played this role faithfully, attending countless engagements, supporting numerous charities, and maintaining a stable family life away from scandal or controversy. Royal watchers had long viewed him as a safe, reliable figure within the monarchy. But Edward's revelations made clear that this dependability had come at an enormous personal cost. The silence he maintained, the steady support he provided, had apparently been achieved by suppressing his own needs and feelings for years. As Edward reached the conclusion of his emotional confession, he could have simply ended with his personal story. He could have stepped back, having shared his truth, and returned to his usual quiet role. Many expected that he would do exactly this, having unburdened himself but not necessarily calling for any broader change. Instead, Edward chose to go further. What came next was not just about his own experience, but about the future of the institution he had served his entire life. Edward looked directly at his audience and stated clearly that it was time to stop pretending emotions do not exist behind palace walls. This was not the language of someone simply sharing personal struggles. This was a direct challenge to how the monarchy operates, to the fundamental assumption that royals must maintain emotional distance and restraint at all times. Edward was not just breaking his own silence. He was questioning whether that silence should ever have been required in the first place. He acknowledged that the monarchy had built its modern image on principles of stoicism, control, and emotional reserve. For generations, royals had been taught to suppress their feelings, to prioritize duty over personal needs, to present a facade of strength regardless of internal struggles. Edward admitted he had followed these unwritten rules faithfully for over 40 years. But then he asked the question that reframed his entire confession. What has that silence cost us, both as individuals and as a family? This was the moment when Edward's personal story transformed into something larger. He was not attacking the monarchy or threatening to leave it. He was not expressing bitterness or seeking revenge for past hurts. Instead, he was pleading for evolution, for the institution to recognize that the old ways of doing things might be causing more harm than good. Edward urged senior figures within the royal family to look forward rather than backward, to consider protecting not just the crown as an institution, but the actual people who wear it and serve it. Edward specifically called for creating space within the family for emotional honesty and authenticity. He did not name enemies or assign blame to particular individuals. Instead, he focused on systemic issues, on patterns of behavior that had been passed down through generations. He expressed hope that younger royals, people like Lady Louise Windsor, Zara Tindall, and eventually Prince George, would be allowed to speak honestly about their experiences, to express their feelings, and to be real rather than constantly performing a role. He emphasized that the monarchy possesses many traditions worth preserving, elements of history and continuity that provide value to the nation. Edward was not suggesting that everything should change or that the institution should abandon its heritage. However, he argued passionately that these traditions should not be preserved at the cost of human well-being. The people behind the titles deserve to be treated as people, with emotional needs and struggles that deserve acknowledgement rather than suppression. The response to Prince Edward's emotional confession was swift and overwhelming. Within hours of the Surrey event, clips and quotes from his speech began circulating on social media platforms. By the following morning, the story had become one of the most discussed topics across the United Kingdom and beyond. What started as a relatively small charity gathering had transformed into a national conversation about the monarchy, mental health, and the cost of public service. Social media platforms exploded with reactions throughout the night and into the next day. By 9 o'clock in the morning, hashtags related to Edward's speech were trending across multiple platforms, including Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. The phrase "We hear you, Edward" gained particular traction, with thousands of people using it to express support and solidarity. The speed and scale of the response appeared to catch even seasoned royal watchers by surprise. This was not the typical brief flurry of interest that follows most royal events. Instead, it represented sustained and deeply emotional engagement from people across different demographics and backgrounds. Many people admitted online that they had largely overlooked Edward throughout his decades of public service. Comments frequently mentioned having thought of him simply as the quiet one, the royal who appeared in background photographs while more dramatic stories unfolded elsewhere. But his willingness to speak so honestly apparently changed how many people viewed him. One widely shared post expressed seeing not a prince but a man, a brother, and a son for the first time. Another noted that Edward had been doing important work for years, but it took this moment of vulnerability for people to truly notice and appreciate it. The response extended well beyond casual royal followers. Celebrities, journalists, and royal experts weighed in with their perspectives. Piers Morgan, known for his outspoken commentary on royal matters, described Edward's speech as the most emotionally intelligent moment from the royal family in decades. Analysts from the BBC and other major news organisations provided extensive coverage, with many noting that the power of Edward's words came from their authenticity rather than from any calculated media strategy. The absence of palace management and careful scripting made the moment feel genuine in a way that formal interviews or official statements rarely achieve. Perhaps most surprising was the reaction from people who typically criticize or oppose the monarchy. Anti-monarchist groups and individuals who might have been expected to dismiss Edward's words as irrelevant or self-pitying instead largely applauded his courage. Multiple commenters noted that while they held no particular affection for the royal institution, they recognized the bravery required to speak so honestly about personal struggles. Some suggested that Edward had humanized the crown in a way no one else had managed, creating a connection with ordinary people that transcended political views about the monarchy itself. Within 24 hours, video clips of the speech had accumulated millions of views across various platforms. News outlets throughout the United Kingdom and internationally ran special reports and analysis pieces. Radio programs opened their phone lines for public callers to share their reactions, and the response was overwhelming. One woman called in through tears, explaining that she saw her own father in Edward's description, recognizing the quiet person in her own family who had held everything inside for years. The personal resonance of Edward's story appeared to extend far beyond royal circles. Online forums and discussion groups that had rarely mentioned Edward suddenly filled with supportive messages. People researched and shared information about his decades of work, his consistent dedication to the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, his youth outreach programs, and his attendance at more than 70 public engagements year after year. It seemed as though the nation had collectively remembered someone they had been ignoring, suddenly recognizing the value of contributions they had previously taken for granted. However, the reaction behind palace gates stood in stark contrast to the public enthusiasm. Senior aides reportedly reacted with fury to Edward's unscripted remarks, viewing them as too honest, too emotional, and potentially damaging to the carefully managed royal image. The palace quickly issued a statement attempting to frame the moment as deeply personal rather than representing any shift in royal policy or approach. The carefully worded response suggested an attempt to contain the situation and prevent Edward's words from setting a precedent for other family members. King Charles III remained completely silent on the matter. Despite returning from overseas travel shortly after the speech, he made no public comment and reportedly offered no private communication to Edward either. This silence became its own story, with media outlets and commentators speculating about what it meant. Some interpreted it as disapproval, others as shock or uncertainty about how to respond. The lack of any statement from the king only intensified public interest and kept the story prominent in news coverage for days. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, broke the family silence with a brief but powerful statement. Without any elaborate palace messaging or public relations spin, she simply said that she had never been prouder of Edward. Sources close to the couple indicated that Sophie had not known Edward planned to speak so openly that evening, but she stood firmly behind him once he did. One aide described her holding Edward's hand backstage afterward in a gesture of complete support and solidarity. The couple's children also drew attention in the aftermath of the speech. Lady Louise Windsor, now 22 years old, was photographed leaving Windsor Castle just hours after Edward's confession became public. Paparazzi noted that she appeared emotional but composed as she headed toward Bagshot Park, reportedly to be with her father. Friends of Louise told media outlets that she had always recognized her father's gentle nature, but felt he had been consistently underestimated by others. The family's 17-year-old son James, Earl of Wessex, remained out of public view, but insiders suggested the family had rallied around Edward in the wake of his revelations. Within the palace itself, reactions appeared deeply divided. While some senior aides criticized Edward's departure from protocol, at least two senior royals, whose names were not disclosed to the press, reportedly found themselves moved by his vulnerability. One anonymous source shared that Edward had articulated feelings that many within the family experienced but had never dared to express openly. This suggested that Edward's struggles were not unique, but rather symptomatic of broader issues within the royal system. The question now facing the monarchy is what comes next. Edward's confession has created a moment that cannot simply be ignored or managed away through traditional palace communication strategies. The public has seen something real and responded to it powerfully. Whether the institution chooses to acknowledge and learn from this moment, or attempts to return to business as usual, will likely shape public perception of the monarchy for years to come. Some palace insiders have quietly begun discussing the need for what they call emotional transparency protocols for future public engagements, though whether such discussions will lead to actual change remains uncertain. For Edward himself, this moment may represent the beginning of a fundamentally different role within the royal family. Not a change in official title or duties, but a shift in meaning and purpose. The royal who spent decades in the background has inadvertently positioned himself at the forefront of a conversation about how the monarchy connects with modern Britain. His willingness to be vulnerable has resonated far more deeply than years of dutiful but silent service ever did. Whether the institution embraces this shift or resists it will determine not just Edward's future, but potentially the future relevance of the monarchy itself in an age that increasingly values authenticity over tradition.